Rescuers found a dying cheetah cub, then witnessed a miracle. The sun was still low on the horizon when Dr. Amara Ndlovu received the call. She had been standing on the veranda of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, nursing a cup of tea and watching the golden light spill across the grasslands of the South African Reserve. The voice on the other end of the line was breathless, urgent, a ranger named Thabo, stationed near the border of the protected zone. "We found something," he said. "A cub. Cheetah. It's bad, Amara. Real bad." Amara set down her cup, her pulse already quickening. "How bad?" "Barely breathing. Can't stand. Looks like it's been alone for days, maybe longer. Dehydrated, malnourished. I don't know if it'll make it to you." She didn't hesitate. "Bring it in now." Within 20 minutes, the clinic was alive with controlled urgency. Amara had already prepped the examination table, set out IV fluids, oxygen equipment, warming blankets. Her assistant, a young intern named Luca, stood ready with gloves and towels. They'd handled critical cases before: injured antelope, poisoned vultures, orphaned elephants, but cheetah cubs were rare and fragile. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and stay with us. When Thabo arrived, the sight stopped her cold. The cub was wrapped in a torn fleece blanket, cradled in Thabo's arms like a newborn. Its spotted coat was matted and dull, clumped with dirt and dried blood. One of its hind legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, but it was the eyes that struck Amara most, half open, glazed, distant. The cub's breathing was shallow, irregular, a faint rattle in its tiny chest. "Found her near the dry riverbed," Thabo said quietly, his face tight with emotion. "No sign of the mother, no tracks, just her." Amara took the cub gently, feeling the alarming lightness of its body. The little cheetah couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. At this age, she should have been playful, curious, bounding after her mother through the tall grass. Instead, she was limp, unresponsive, teetering on the edge of death. "Luca, get the warming pad. Start fluids, half-strength saline, slow drip. I need to assess her vitals." The next hour was a blur of precision and prayer. Amara worked with practiced hands, checking the cub's heart rate, dangerously slow, and her temperature, far too low. The fractured leg would need surgery, but that was a distant concern. Right now, the priority was survival. The cub's body was shutting down, organs struggling, dehydration severe. Amara inserted a tiny catheter into a vein, started the IV, and wrapped the cub in heated blankets. "Come on, little one," she whispered. "Stay with me." But the cub didn't respond. Her breathing grew shallower. Her small chest rose and fell with painful effort, and then, for a terrifying moment, it stopped. "She's crashing," Luca said, his voice tight. Amara's heart pounded. She placed a hand on the cub's chest, felt the faint flutter of life still clinging. She administered a small dose of adrenaline, then began gentle compressions, her fingers moving with careful rhythm over the fragile ribcage. "Breathe," she murmured. "Breathe." Seconds stretched into eternity. The room was silent except for the steady beep of the monitor and the sound of Amara's voice, soft and steady, willing the cub back from the brink. And then a gasp, a faint, ragged inhale. The cub's chest rose, once, twice. The monitor beeped, faint but steady. Luca exhaled, relief flooding his face. "She's back." But Amara didn't relax. She knew this was only the beginning. The cub had survived the immediate crisis, but the next 24 hours would be critical. Infection, organ failure, shock, any of them could still claim her. As the cub lay motionless under the warming lights, Amara stepped back and allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had seen so much loss in this work, so many animals that couldn't be saved. But every time she looked into the eyes of a creature clinging to life, she remembered why she did this. Why she had left a comfortable veterinary practice in Johannesburg to come here, to this remote place where the wild still ruled and every life mattered. She looked down at the tiny cheetah, her spotted coat now clean and soft under the glow of the lamp. The cub's eyes were closed, her breathing more even now, though still weak. "What do we call her?" Luca asked softly. Amara thought for a moment. "Nala," she said. "It means gift in Swahili, because that's what she is. A gift, a chance." Luca smiled faintly. "Nala it is." As the day wore on, Amara stayed close. She checked Nala's vitals every 30 minutes, adjusted the IV drip, monitored her temperature. The cub remained unconscious, her small body still and fragile. But she was alive, and for now, that was enough. By evening, the reserve had grown quiet. The sounds of the bush filtered through the open window. The distant call of a fish-eagle, the rustle of wind through acacia trees, the low rumble of a lion somewhere far off. Amara sat beside Nala's crate, her hand resting lightly on the cub's back. Feeling the faint rise and fall of her breathing, she thought about the mother. Where was she? Had she been killed by poachers, struck by a vehicle, taken down by a predator, or had she simply abandoned the cub, unable to care for her? Cheetahs were fragile in the wild. Their populations were dwindling, their territories shrinking. Every cub mattered. Amara closed her eyes, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had done everything she could. Now it was up to Nala. As the stars began to emerge in the vast African sky, Amara whispered a quiet promise to the little cheetah lying before her. "I won't give up on you. Not yet." And somewhere, deep within that tiny, battered body, a spark of life flickered, faint but refusing to go out. The first night was the longest. Amara remained at the clinic, sleeping in short bursts on the fold-out cot she kept in the corner of the recovery room. Every hour she woke to check on Nala, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, feeling the warmth of her small body, watching the slow drip of the IV fluids that kept her alive. At 3 in the morning, Nala stirred for the first time. It was barely perceptible, a twitch of her ear, a faint movement of her paw. But to Amara it was everything. She sat up immediately, leaning over the crate, her hand hovering just above the cub's head. "Nala," she whispered. "Can you hear me?" The cub's eyes remained closed, but her breathing deepened slightly, became more rhythmic. Amara felt a surge of cautious hope. The body was responding. The will to survive, however faint, was still there. By dawn, Luca arrived with fresh supplies and a thermos of strong coffee. He found Amara sitting cross-legged beside the crate, her eyes shadowed with fatigue, but alert, focused. "Any change?" he asked, handing her the coffee. "Small movements. Her vitals are holding steady. Temperature is up 0.5 degree. Amara took a sip, letting the warmth spread through her. "She's fighting." Luca crouched down, peering at the cub. "She's a fighter, then, like someone else I know." Amara smiled faintly. "I don't know about that." But Luca was right in a way. Amara had been fighting her whole life, against expectations, against loss, against the creeping sense that the world was losing more than it could ever recover. She had grown up in Durban, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a mechanic, neither of whom understood her obsession with animals. While other kids played soccer or watched television, Amara spent her afternoons at the local library, devouring books about Jane Goodall, Dian Fossey, the great conservationists who had devoted their lives to protecting the voiceless. She had worked her way through veterinary school on scholarships and part-time jobs, then spent 5 years in a busy urban clinic treating pampered house pets. The work was fine, respectable, but it felt hollow. She knew she was meant for something more. It was a documentary that changed everything. A film about the collapse of cheetah populations across southern Africa, habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict, illegal trafficking. The footage of a mother cheetah watching helplessly as her cubs were taken by poachers had shattered something inside Amara. That night, she applied to the rehabilitation center. 3 months later, she left the city and never looked back. That had been 6 years ago. She had saved dozens of animals since then. Some had been released back into the wild. Others had become permanent residents of sanctuaries. But she had also lost many, too many. and each loss carved a deeper scar. Nala could not be another one. Over the next 3 days, the cub remained in a fragile state, alive but not truly living. She drank small amounts of formula from a syringe, her mouth working weakly around the nipple. Her eyes opened occasionally, unfocused and dull, before closing again. The fractured leg was splinted and wrapped, but Amara decided surgery would have to wait until Nala was stronger. Thabo visited often, bringing updates from the field. Rangers had searched the area where Nala was found, looking for any sign of her mother or siblings. They found nothing. No tracks, no kills, no den. It was as if Nala had simply appeared out of nowhere, a ghost cub left behind by a world that had already moved on. Maybe the mother was hit by a vehicle, Thabo suggested one afternoon, his voice heavy, or taken by poachers. We've had 3 incidents this month alone. Amara's jaw tightened. Poaching was a relentless plague, driven by demand for skins, bones, live cubs sold to private collectors. The thought made her stomach turn. If that's true, Nala might be the only survivor. Then we give her every chance, Thabo said firmly, whatever it takes. On the 4th day, something shifted. Amara was preparing another feeding when she heard a sound. Soft, plaintive, barely more than a squeak. She froze, then slowly turned toward the crate. Nala was awake, fully awake. Her amber eyes were open, clear and focused, and she was looking directly at Amara. The cub's mouth opened, and that small, desperate cry came again. A call for her mother, for comfort, for safety. Amara's heart clenched. She knelt beside the crate, moving slowly, carefully. "Hey, little one," she murmured. "I'm here. You're safe." Nala's eyes tracked her movement, and for the first time there was recognition, not of Amara specifically, but of presence, of warmth, of the possibility of care. The cub tried to lift her head, but the effort was too much. She collapsed back onto the blanket, panting softly. "Don't push it," Amara said gently. "You're still healing, but you're doing so well, Nala. So well." She reached into the crate and stroked the cub's head with one finger, feeling the softness of her fur, the delicate bones beneath. Nala's eyes drifted closed, but this time it wasn't unconsciousness. It was rest, trust. Luca, who had been watching from the doorway, smiled. "She knows you." "Maybe," Amara said quietly. "Or maybe she's just desperate for anything familiar. Doesn't matter. She's responding. That's what counts." Over the following days, the bond deepened. Nala began to eat more, her body slowly regaining strength. She could lift her head now, could follow Amara with her eyes as she moved around the clinic. When Amara spoke, Nala's ears would perk up, her gaze sharpening with attention. Amara found herself spending nearly every waking moment with the cub. She fed her every 3 hours, cleaned her wounds, changed her bedding, whispered stories and reassurances. At night, when the clinic was quiet, she would sit beside the crate and read aloud from the wildlife journal she kept stacked on her desk, articles about cheetah behavior, conservation efforts, rewilding programs. Nala would listen, her eyes half closed, her breathing calm and steady. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Amara realized something had changed within herself. She had always cared deeply about the animals she treated, but this was different. Nala had become more than a patient. She had become a purpose, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming loss, even when the odds were impossible, life could still find a way. On the 10th day, Nala stood for the first time. It happened in the early morning, while Amara was preparing breakfast. She heard a scuffling sound and turned to see Nala on her feet, wobbly and uncertain. Her splintered leg held awkwardly off the ground. The cub swayed, her muscles trembling with effort, but she didn't fall. Amara's breath caught. "Luca, come here!" Luca rushed in, his eyes widening. "Oh my God!" Nala took a tentative step, then another. Her movements were clumsy, uncoordinated, but there was determination in her eyes. a spark of the wild spirit that had kept her alive against all odds. "Good girl," Amara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That's my good girl." Nala looked at her, and for the first time, the cub's mouth opened in what could almost be called a smile, a relaxed, content expression that made Amara's heart swell. She was going to make it. Against every expectation, every grim prognosis, Nala was going to survive. But as Amara watched the cub take those first fragile steps, she felt a shadow of worry creep in. Survival was only the beginning. The real question, the one that would define everything that came next, was what kind of life awaited Nala now, and whether Amara would be able to give her the future she deserved. 2 weeks after her arrival, Nala was thriving. At least that's what it looked like on the surface. She had gained weight, her coat had regained its luster, and her appetite was voracious. She followed Amara everywhere, chirping and mewing for attention, her small body brimming with energy. The splint on her leg had been removed, and while she still limped noticeably, she could walk, run short distances, even attempt clumsy pounces on the toys Luca had fashioned from rope and feathers. But Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It started with small things, the way Nala favored her injured leg more than she should, the occasional tremor that ran through her hindquarters when she stood for too long. Amara had chalked it up to normal recovery, the body adjusting to healed bone and muscle. But as the days passed, the signs became harder to ignore. One morning, as Nala attempted to leap onto a low platform in her enclosure, her back leg collapsed beneath her. She tumbled awkwardly, landing on her side with a startled cry. Amara was beside her in seconds, hands gentle but probing, feeling along the leg, checking for swelling, heat, any indication of re-injury. Nala whimpered, pulling away, her eyes wide with confusion and pain. "It's okay, sweetheart," Amara murmured, her heart sinking. "Let me look." But even as she examined the leg, she knew what she would find. The fracture had healed, but the alignment was off, just slightly but enough. The bone had set at an angle that would never fully correct itself. And worse, there was nerve damage. She could see it in the way Nala's toes splayed when she tried to put weight down, the way her muscles didn't respond quite right. Amara sat back on her heels, her mind racing. This changed everything. That afternoon, she called Dr. Henrik Botha, a veterinary orthopedic specialist based in Pretoria. She had worked with him before on complex cases, and if anyone could offer guidance, it was him. She sent him the X-rays, her notes, video footage of Nala's movements. His response came 2 hours later, and it was not what she wanted to hear. "The fracture healed poorly," Henrik said over the phone, his tone sympathetic but clinical. "Given how long she went without treatment, and the severity of the break, it's not surprising. The nerve damage is permanent, Amara. That leg will never function at full capacity." Amara closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temple. "Can we operate, re-break and reset? At this stage, the risk would be enormous. She's still young, still growing. Another surgery could do more harm than good, and even if we did it, there's no guarantee the nerve function would improve." "So, what are you saying?" Henrik was quiet for a moment. "I'm saying that Nala will always have a significant limp. She'll manage. Animals are remarkably adaptive. But in the wild, Amara, you know what this means." She did. She knew exactly what it meant. Cheetahs were the fastest land animals on Earth, built for speed and precision. They relied on explosive acceleration to chase down prey, to escape larger predators. A cheetah with a compromised leg couldn't hunt effectively, couldn't run fast enough to survive. In the wild, Nala would be vulnerable, unable to compete, unable to defend herself. She would be dead within weeks. Amara thanked Henrik and ended the call, then sat in silence, staring at the wall. Luca found her there 20 minutes later, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. "What did he say?" Luca asked quietly. She told him, every word, every grim, inescapable conclusion. Luca sank into the chair across from her, running a hand through his hair. So, she can't be released? No, Amara said, her voice flat. She can't. Then what do we do? That was the question that haunted her for the next several days. What do we do? There were options, technically. Nala could live permanently at the rehabilitation center, but they weren't equipped for long-term care of large predators. Their enclosures were designed for temporary recovery, not lifelong housing, and funding was always precarious. Every mouth to feed, every animal to care for, stretched their resources thinner. There were sanctuaries, places that took in non-releasable wildlife. Amara contacted 3 within the region, sending inquiries, photographs, medical records. 2 didn't respond. The 3rd wrote back, with regret. They were at capacity. No room for another cheetah, perhaps try again in 6 months. 6 months. Nala would be nearly full-grown by then, more difficult to place, more expensive to care for. Amara felt the weight of it pressing down on her, a suffocating burden. She had saved Nala's life, but for what? To live in a cage, to never know the freedom of the open savannah, the thrill of the hunt, the wind against her face as she ran. Was that truly saving her at all? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Amara sat in Nala's enclosure, her back against the fence. The cub was curled in her lap, purring, a sound cheetahs made, low and rumbling, a sign of contentment. Nala's eyes were half closed, her body relaxed and warm. "I don't know what to do," Amara whispered, stroking the soft fur between Nala's ears. "I brought you back from the edge, but now I don't know how to give you the life you deserve." Nala shifted, nuzzling against Amara's hand, oblivious to the turmoil in the woman's heart. Thabo visited the next day, bringing supplies and news from the reserve. He found Amara in the clinic, poring over documents, maps, emails, searching for something, anything, that might offer a solution. "You look like hell," Thabo said, not unkindly. "Thanks," Amara muttered, not looking up. He set down the supplies and pulled up a chair. "Talk to me." So she did. She told him about the X-rays, the prognosis, the impossible choices. She told him about the sanctuaries that were full, the enclosures that were inadequate, the future that seemed to offer Nala nothing but confinement. Thabo listened, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "there's another option you haven't mentioned." Amara looked up, frowning. "What?" "You could keep her." The words hung in the air between them. "Keep her? Here? Thabo, we can't." "Why not?" He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You've already built a bond with her. She trusts you. You know her needs better than anyone. And yeah, the center isn't set up for permanent residence right now, but that could change. We could build a proper enclosure, apply for funding, make it work. That's not what we do here. This is a rehabilitation center, not a zoo." "It's not a zoo if she's an ambassador," Thabo countered. "Think about it, Amara. How many people never see a cheetah in their entire lives? How many kids grow up not understanding why these animals matter? Nala could teach them. She could be the reason someone decides to care, to donate, to fight for conservation." Amara shook her head, the idea both tempting and terrifying. "I don't know if I can do that. Keep her here, confined for the rest of her life. Would it be confinement if she's loved? If she's safe? If she has purpose?" Thabo's voice softened. "I've seen you with her, Amara. You've given her more than survival. You've given her a life. Maybe it's not the life she would have had in the wild, but it's still a good life. A life worth living." His words echoed in her mind long after he left. That night, Amara stood at the edge of Nala's enclosure, watching the young cheetah chase moths in the twilight. Nala moved with surprising grace despite her limp, her body fluid and alert, her eyes bright with curiosity. She pounced, missed, tumbled, then leapt up again with boundless enthusiasm. She was alive, truly, vibrantly alive. And maybe, Amara thought, that was enough. Maybe Nala didn't need the vast savannah or the thrill of the hunt to have a meaningful existence. Maybe she just needed safety, care, and the knowledge that she was valued. But even as the thought formed, doubt crept in. Was she rationalizing, making excuses to keep Nala close because she couldn't bear to let go? Was this about what was best for the cub, or what was easiest for her? Amara didn't have the answer. Not yet. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever decision she made, it would define not just Nala's future, but her own. And the weight of that responsibility was almost more than she could bear. As darkness settled over the reserve and the sounds of the African night rose around her, the distant roar of lions, the chatter of baboons, the haunting call of a hyena, Amara made a silent promise to the little cheetah who had come into her life against all odds. "I will find a way," she whispered into the night. "I don't know how yet, but I will find a way to give you the best life possible. I swear it." And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the doubt, she felt the first stirrings of an idea, fragile, uncertain, but undeniably real. A way forward. A miracle in the making. The idea came to Amara at 3 in the morning, the way most revelations do, sudden, insistent, refusing to be ignored. She had been lying awake, staring at the ceiling of her small quarters, her mind cycling through the same exhausting loop of problems and dead ends. Sanctuaries were full. The center couldn't sustain long-term care. Releasing Nala was impossible. Euthanasia was unthinkable. And then, as if her subconscious had been working on it all along, the pieces fell into place. What if they didn't just keep Nala as a permanent resident? What if they built something bigger, a conservation education program with Nala at its heart? Not a zoo, not a spectacle, but a bridge between people and the wild. A living testament to both the fragility and resilience of these magnificent creatures. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. But as Amara sat up, reaching for her notebook and pen, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. By dawn, she had filled 6 pages with notes, rough sketches of enclosure designs, ideas for educational programs, potential funding sources, partnership opportunities. She knew it would take months, maybe years to realize, but it was a path forward, a purpose for Nala that went beyond mere survival. When Luca arrived at 7, he found Amara already at her desk, surrounded by papers, laptop open, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I understand the application process is lengthy, but I'm hoping we could at least discuss the preliminary requirements." She looked up, saw Luca, and gestured for him to sit. "Thank you. I'll send the proposal by end of week." "Yes, thank you." She hung up and immediately began typing. "What's going on?" Luca asked, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "I'm building a program," Amara said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "An ambassador program for Nala and potentially other non-releasable animals, educational outreach, school visits, conservation awareness. We partner with local communities, bring people here to learn about cheetahs, about why they matter, what we can do to protect them." Luca's eyebrows rose. "That's, ambitious." "I know. Where would we even start?" Amara stopped typing and looked at him, her eyes bright with determination. "With Nala, we make her enclosure a model, spacious, enriching, as close to natural as we can get. We document her recovery, her story. People connect with stories, Luca. They connect with individuals. Nala isn't just a cheetah, she's a survivor. She's proof that conservation matters, that every life is worth fighting for." Luca was quiet for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." "Then I'm in. What do you need?" Over the following days, Amara worked with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She contacted architects who specialized in wildlife enclosures, conservation organizations that might offer grants, educators who could help design curriculum. She reached out to volunteers, former colleagues, anyone who might contribute expertise or resources. The response was mixed. Some were enthusiastic, offering support and encouragement. Others were skeptical. Another ambitious project doomed to fail. Another well-meaning effort that would run out of money and momentum. But Amara pressed on. Thabo became her closest ally, using his connections within the reserve network to secure meetings with officials and potential donors. Together, they crafted a proposal that emphasized not just Nala's story, but the broader crisis facing cheetahs across Africa. Populations had declined by 70% in the past 50 years. Habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict, illegal trafficking. The threats were overwhelming. But education and engagement could shift the tide. People protected what they loved, and they loved what they understood. 3 weeks after the initial idea took root, Amara received a call that changed everything. Dr. Ndlovu, this is Catherine Osman, director of the Mpumalanga Wildlife Trust. I received your proposal. Amara's heart hammered. The trust was one of the largest conservation funders in the region. If they were interested. I'll be honest, Catherine continued, her voice warm but measured. We receive dozens of proposals like this every month. Most of them never get off the ground. But yours caught my attention. The ambassador model, the emphasis on community education, it's aligned with our mission. I'd like to visit, see the facility, meet this cheetah of yours. When? Amara asked, barely able to contain her excitement. Thursday, 2 days from now, would that work? Absolutely, yes, thank you. When she hung up, she stood in stunned silence for a moment, then let out a whoop of triumph that brought Luca running. What happened? The trust. They're coming. Thursday. Luca's jaw dropped. The Mpumalanga Trust? Amara, they could fund the entire project. I know, which means we have 2 days to make this place perfect. They worked around the clock. Amara and Luca, with help from Thabo and 2 other rangers, cleaned every corner of the facility, organized records, prepared presentations. They expanded Nala's temporary enclosure, adding climbing structures, shaded areas, a shallow pool for cooling off. They wanted Catherine to see not just what was, but what could be. Nala, oblivious to the frenzy around her, thrived. She was nearly 4 months old now, her body filling out with lean muscle, her personality emerging more each day. She was playful, curious, and remarkably affectionate, especially with Amara. When Amara entered the enclosure, Nala would bound over, chirping excitedly, rubbing her head against Amara's legs, demanding attention. It was this bond, more than anything, that gave Amara confidence. Nala wasn't just surviving in captivity, she was thriving. She had formed a deep attachment to her human caretakers, something that would have been impossible in the wild. And while part of Amara still mourned the life Nala would never have, she was beginning to see the beauty in what this life could offer instead. Thursday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Catherine Osman pulled up to the center at 10 o'clock sharp, stepping out of a dusty Land Cruiser with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years in the bush. She was in her mid-50s, silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, eyes sharp and assessing. Dr. Ndlovu, she said, extending a hand, thank you for having me. Thank you for coming, Amara replied, shaking her hand firmly. Please, call me Amara. Catherine smiled. Catherine. Now where's this miracle cub I've been reading about? Amara led her through the facility, explaining their operations, their success rates, their vision for the future. Catherine listened intently, asking pointed questions, taking notes. She was thorough, professional, giving nothing away. And then they reached Nala's enclosure. The young cheetah was lounging in a patch of sunlight, her spotted coat gleaming, her eyes half closed in contentment. When she heard voices, her ears perked up, and she lifted her head, gaze locking onto Amara. Immediately Nala rose, with that characteristic limp, and trotted over to the fence, chirping softly. "Hello, beautiful girl," Amara murmured, crouching down. Nala pressed her face against the fence, and Amara reached through to stroke her cheek. Catherine watched in silence. Then she spoke, her voice softer than before. "Tell me her story, all of it." So Amara did. She told Catherine about the call from Thabo, the dying cub wrapped in a blanket, the first desperate night, the miracle of survival. She told her about the fracture, the nerve damage, the reality that Nala would never run free. And she told her about the choice she had made, not to see Nala as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a chance to show the world that every life, no matter how imperfect, had value. When she finished, Catherine was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on Nala. "You love her," Catherine said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Amara admitted, "I do." "That's good. Love is what makes this work sustainable. Projects built on obligation burn out. Projects built on love endure." Catherine turned to face Amara fully. "I'm going to recommend full funding, enclosure construction, educational materials, staff expansion, the works. But I have one condition." Amara's breath caught. "Anything. This can't just be about Nala. She's the beginning, but if we're building a program, it needs to be scalable, reproducible. Other centers should be able to look at what you've done here and say, 'We can do that too. Can you commit to that?'" "Yes," Amara said without hesitation. "Absolutely." Catherine extended her hand again. "Then we have a deal." As they shook hands, Amara felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, overwhelmed by relief, gratitude, and something deeper, vindication. She had fought for Nala, refused to give up, and now that faith was being rewarded. That evening, after Catherine had left and the sun had begun its descent, Amara sat in Nala's enclosure, the cub curled beside her, purring steadily. She ran her hand along Nala's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing, the warmth of her body. "We did it," she whispered. "We're going to build you a real home, a life. You're going to help save your species, little one, just by being you." And Nala's purring intensified, her eyes closing in absolute trust. And for the first time since the day Thabo had brought that dying cub through the door, Amara allowed herself to believe in miracles. Not the kind that defied nature or logic, but the kind that happened when compassion met determination, when love refused to surrender, when one fragile life became the spark that lit a fire. The real work was just beginning, but Amara was ready, and so was Nala. 3 months into construction of the new enclosure, disaster struck. It began with something small, so small that Amara almost missed it. Nala had been eating less over the past 2 days, her appetite diminished, her energy lower than usual. At first, Amara attributed it to the heat. November had brought scorching temperatures to the reserve, the kind of oppressive, unrelenting heat that made even the hardiest creatures sluggish. But on the 3rd morning, when Nala refused her breakfast entirely and remained curled in the corner of her enclosure, barely moving, Amara knew something was terribly wrong. "Nala!" She entered the enclosure, her voice soft, concerned. "Come on, sweetheart. Let me see you." The young cheetah lifted her head weakly, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Her breathing was rapid, shallow. When Amara placed a hand on her side, she felt the heat radiating from Nala's body, fever, dangerously high. "Luca!" Amara's voice cracked with urgency. "Get the exam room ready, now!" Within minutes, Nala was on the examination table, Amara's hands moving with practiced precision, even as her heart raced with fear. Temperature 105.3 degrees. Heart rate elevated, respiratory rate concerning. She drew blood, started an IV, administered fluids and antibiotics. But as the hours passed, Nala's condition deteriorated. By evening, the young cheetah was unresponsive, her body limp, her breathing labored. The blood work came back showing a severe infection, sepsis, spreading rapidly through her system. The source was unclear. Perhaps a wound they had missed, bacteria that had entered her bloodstream, some weakness in her immune system that had finally been exploited. The why didn't matter. What mattered was that Nala was dying. Again. Amara stood over her, hands trembling as she adjusted the IV drip, checked the monitors, administered another round of medication. She had been here before, that first desperate night when Nala had arrived more dead than alive. She had fought then, and won. But this felt different. This felt like the universe demanding payment for a miracle it had granted too easily. "Stay with me," Amara whispered, her hand resting on Nala's chest, feeling the faint, irregular beat of her heart. "Please, Nala, stay with me." Luca stood in the doorway, his face pale. "Should I call Henrik?" "Already did. He's 3 hours away. Said to keep her stable, keep her hydrated, monitor for organ failure." Amara's voice was hollow. "That's all we can do. Wait. She beat this once. She can do it again." Amara wanted to believe that, but she had seen too many animals succumb to sepsis. It was fast, merciless, and once it took hold, the odds plummeted. Even with aggressive treatment, Nala's chances were slim. Night fell, and Amara refused to leave. She pulled a chair beside the examination table, her hand never leaving Nala's side, her eyes fixed on the monitors that beeped steadily in the dim light. Every breath Nala took felt like a victory. Every moment her heart kept beating was a gift. Thabo arrived near midnight, bringing food that Amara didn't eat and coffee she barely touched. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "Alive. Barely." He pulled up another chair, sitting beside her in silence. They had been through so much together, rescues, releases, losses that had broken their hearts. But this was different. Nala wasn't just another case. She was the foundation of everything they were building, the symbol of hope they had promised to the trust, to the community, to themselves. If Nala died, the program died with her. But more than that, if Nala died, a part of Amara would die too. "You did everything right," Thabo said after a long while. "You know that, don't you?" "Did I?" Amara's voice was raw. "I brought her back from the brink, gave her a life she could never fully live, built a future around her that maybe she never wanted. What if this is my fault? What if the stress of all this—" "Stop!" Thabo's voice was firm. "You gave her a chance. You gave her love. You gave her every possible advantage. If she doesn't make it, it won't be because you failed her. It'll be because sometimes, despite everything we do, life is just fragile." Amara closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. She hadn't allowed herself to cry until now, hadn't let the fear break through. But here, in the darkness, with Nala's life hanging by a thread, the dam finally burst. Thabo said nothing, just reached over and squeezed her shoulder, a silent anchor in the storm. At 2 in the morning, Nala's heart rate dropped. The monitor's beeping slowed, became irregular. Amara's eyes snapped open. She had been dozing, head resting on her arms, and she was on her feet instantly. "No, no, no, no." She checked Nala's vitals, her hands shaking, pulse weak and thready, breathing barely perceptible. The sepsis was winning. She had minutes, maybe less. Amara made a decision. "Luca, get me the epinephrine and prepare a dopamine drip. We're going to support her blood pressure manually." "Amara, if her organs are shutting down—" "I don't care. We're not giving up." "Not yet." For the next hour, Amara fought with everything she had. She administered stimulants to keep Nala's heart beating, adjusted the IV to maintain blood pressure, monitored oxygen levels. It was a delicate, desperate dance. Too much intervention could cause cardiac arrest, too little, and Nala would simply slip away. But slowly, impossibly, Nala stabilized. Her heart rate steadied, her breathing deepened. The monitors settled into a rhythm that, while not strong, was at least consistent. Amara collapsed back into her chair, exhausted, her whole body trembling from adrenaline and fear. "She's holding," Luca said, his voice filled with wonder. "She's actually holding." Dawn broke over the reserve, pale light filtering through the clinic windows. Henrik arrived shortly after, rushing in with his medical kit, his expression grave. But when he examined Nala, checked her vitals, reviewed the night's records, his face softened with something like amazement. "You pulled her back," he said, looking at Amara with open respect. "I won't ask how, because I'm not sure I'd believe it. But whatever you did, it worked. Will she recover?" Amara's voice was hoarse. Henrik was quiet, cautious. "The next 48 hours are critical. If the infection is responding to antibiotics, if her organs haven't sustained permanent damage, then yes, she has a chance, a real chance." It wasn't a guarantee, but it was enough. Over the following days, Nala fought her way back from the edge. The fever broke on the second day. Her appetite returned on the third. By the end of the week, she was sitting up, eyes clear, responding to Amara's voice with soft chirps. Word of Nala's crisis spread through the reserve and beyond. Volunteers, rangers, local community members, people who had heard about the young cheetah and her story, began showing up at the center, bringing supplies, offering help, asking if there was anything they could do. Catherine from the trust called personally. "I heard what happened," she said. "How is she?" "Recovering," Amara replied. "It was close, too close. But she made it, because you refused to let her go." Catherine paused. "You know, Amara, this is exactly why the program will succeed. Because it's built on people like you, people who see value in every life, who fight when others would give up. That's what we need more of in this world." The words stayed with Amara long after the call ended. 2 weeks later, Nala was back in her enclosure, stronger, healthier, her spirit undimmed. The new habitat was nearing completion, a sprawling space with natural vegetation, elevated platforms, and enrichment features designed to keep her engaged and active. It was more than an enclosure. It was a home. On the day they moved Nala into her new habitat, a small crowd gathered: staff, volunteers, a few local schoolchildren who had been following her story. Amara opened the gate, and Nala stepped through cautiously, her golden eyes wide with curiosity. For a moment, the young cheetah simply stood there, taking it all in: the space, the scents, the rustling grass, the open sky above. Then, with a burst of energy, she ran. Her gait was uneven, the limp pronounced, but she ran with pure joy, bounding across the enclosure, leaping onto a platform, rolling in a patch of soft earth. She was free, not in the wild, but in her own way. Free to be herself, to live without fear, to know she was safe and loved. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Amara watched, tears streaming down her face, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was the miracle. Not that Nala had survived, though that was miraculous enough, but that her survival had brought people together, had sparked compassion, had reminded everyone watching that every life mattered. Thabo stood beside her, grinning. "Look at her. She's home." "Yeah," Amara whispered. "She really is." That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Amara sat at the edge of Nala's enclosure, watching the young cheetah settle into her favorite spot, beneath an acacia tree. Nala looked over, met Amara's gaze, and chirped softly, a sound of contentment, of recognition, of trust. "We did it, girl," Amara said quietly. "Against all odds, we did it." And as darkness settled over the reserve and the stars began to emerge in the vast African sky, Amara finally allowed herself to feel what she had been holding back for so long: pride, gratitude, peace. They had faced the worst and come through. Nala was alive. The program was real. And the miracle they had witnessed wasn't just about survival. It was about what happened when love refused to surrender, when courage met compassion, when one person decided that a single life was worth fighting for. And in that moment, Amara knew with absolute certainty that Nala's story was far from over. It was only just beginning. 6 months after Nala's near-fatal battle with sepsis, the rehabilitation center had transformed into something no one could have imagined. The Nala Project, as it had officially been named, had become a beacon of hope, not just for the reserve, but for the entire region. The enclosure had been completed, exceeding even Amara's ambitious vision. It sprawled across 2 acres with natural copiers for climbing, native grasses, water features, and carefully designed sight lines that allowed Nala both privacy and the ability to observe her surroundings, just as a wild cheetah would. But more importantly, the program had begun to touch lives. It started small. A class of 30 schoolchildren from a nearby township brought to the center by their teacher, a woman named Nomsa, who had read about Nala in the local newspaper. The children arrived wide-eyed and chattering, many of them having never seen a cheetah or any wild animal up close. Amara stood before them in the education pavilion they had built adjacent to Nala's habitat, her heart pounding with nervous energy. She had treated hundreds of animals, published research papers, spoken at veterinary conferences, but talking to children was different. This mattered in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "How many of you have heard of cheetahs?" she asked. Every hand shot up. "And how many of you have seen one in real life?" The hands dropped. Only 2 remained raised, children whose families had taken them on safari, a luxury most could never afford. "That's what I thought," Amara said gently. "Cheetahs live right here in South Africa, in your country, but most people never get to see them. And because we don't see them, we forget they're there. We forget they need our help." She paused. "Today, I want to introduce you to someone very special. Her name is Nala, and she has a story to tell." She led them to the viewing area, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perfect view of Nala's enclosure. The young cheetah was lounging on a raised platform, her body relaxed, her tail twitching lazily. The children gasped, pressing close to the glass, their faces filled with wonder. "She's so beautiful," one girl whispered. "Why is she limping?" a boy asked, noticing Nala's distinctive gait as she stood and stretched. Amara told them the story, keeping it simple but honest. She explained how Nala had been found dying, how they had saved her, and why she could never return to the wild. She talked about cheetah conservation, about the threats these animals faced, about what each person could do to help. As she spoke, she watched the children's faces. She saw curiosity transform into understanding, understanding into empathy, empathy into determination. These weren't just facts being absorbed, something deeper was happening. Connection, care. When the presentation ended, Nomsa approached Amara, her eyes bright with emotion. "This is what our children need," she said. "Not just textbooks and lectures, but this real connection to the natural world. To understand that we're part of something bigger, that we have a role to play." "Bring them back anytime," Amara said. "That's what we're here for." Word spread quickly. More schools requested visits. Community groups, youth organizations, even corporate teams looking for meaningful volunteer experiences. Within 3 months, they were hosting educational sessions twice a week, reaching hundreds of people. And at the center of it all was Nala. The young cheetah had grown into a stunning adolescent, her body long and lean, her coat a masterpiece of spots and golden fur. Despite her permanent limp, she moved with grace and confidence, her personality shining through in every interaction. She was curious, playful, and remarkably attuned to the people who visited her. Luca often joked that Nala knew exactly when she was being watched. During educational sessions, she would position herself perfectly in view, lounging elegantly or engaging in behaviors that captivated the audience, grooming, stretching, occasionally offering a display of her impressive, if slightly compromised, speed. "She's a natural performer," Luca said one afternoon, watching Nala interact with a group of visiting veterinary students. Amara smiled. "She knows she's special, and she's using it for good." But the transformation wasn't just external. Something had shifted within Amara herself. For years, she had carried the weight of conservation like a burden, the constant losses, the impossible odds, the feeling that no matter how hard she fought, it was never enough. She had saved individual animals, yes, but the larger crisis continued unabated. Habitat loss, poaching, human-wildlife conflict. The problems were so vast, so systemic, that her efforts felt like drops in an endless ocean. Nala had changed that perspective. Through this one cheetah, Amara had reached more people, inspired more action, generated more awareness than she ever had through years of traditional conservation work. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful force for change wasn't data or policy or scientific papers. It was story. It was connection. It was giving people a reason to care. One evening, after a particularly moving session where a young boy had stood at the glass with tears streaming down his face, saying, "I want to help animals like Nala when I grow up," Amara sat in her office, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had created. Thabo found her there, staring at the wall, a strange expression on her face. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so." She looked at him. "I just realized something. For years, I've been fighting to save animals. But what we're doing here, we're not just saving animals, we're creating the next generation of conservationists. We're changing hearts and minds. That's how we win, not by fighting harder, but by making people fall in love with what we're trying to protect." Thabo smiled. "Took you long enough to figure that out." She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like releasing years of tension. "Yeah. Well, better late than never." The program's success attracted attention beyond the local community. National media picked up Nala's story. A documentary crew requested access, wanting to film her journey. Conservation organizations from across Africa reached out, asking for guidance on replicating the model at their own facilities. Catherine from the Trust visited regularly, each time bringing news of additional funding, new partnerships, expanded opportunities. "You've created something truly special here," she told Amara during one visit. "We're seeing measurable impact, increased donations to conservation causes, more young people pursuing wildlife careers, communities implementing protection measures for local wildlife. And it all traces back to Nala, to you refusing to give up on her." But perhaps the most profound transformation happened in the people who worked at the center. Luca, who had arrived as a quiet, uncertain intern, had blossomed into a confident educator and advocate. He led many of the school sessions now, his passion and knowledge inspiring countless visitors. Thabo, already committed to conservation, had found renewed purpose. He often brought rangers from other reserves to learn from the program, sharing knowledge and building networks that strengthened conservation efforts across the region. Even volunteers who came for a few weeks found themselves changed, returning home with new perspectives, new commitments, new ways of engaging with the natural world. And then there were the unexpected moments, the ones that reminded Amara why this work mattered. Like the elderly woman who visited with her grandson and stood at the viewing window with tears in her eyes, saying, "I'm 73 years old, and I've lived in this country my entire life. This is the first time I've ever seen a cheetah. Thank you for giving me this gift." Or the former poacher who came through a community outreach program, looked at Nala and quietly said, "I used to see animals as commodities. Now I see them as family. I won't make that mistake again." Or the little girl who drew a picture of Nala and left it taped to the viewing glass with a note that read, "When I grow up, I'm going to save animals just like you saved Nala. I promise." These moments accumulated, building into something larger than any individual story. They were proof that change was possible, that compassion could be taught, that hope could be nurtured even in the face of overwhelming challenges. 1 year after Nala's arrival at the center, they held a celebration, a gathering of everyone who had been part of the journey. Donors, volunteers, staff, community members, school children who had participated in the educational programs. Hundreds of people filled the grounds, united by their connection to one remarkable cheetah. As the sun began to set, casting the reserve in that distinctive golden African light, Amara stood before the crowd to speak. Nala was visible in the background, lounging on her favorite platform, watching the proceedings with calm, intelligent eyes. "A year ago," Amara began, her voice carrying across the assembled group, I received a call about a dying cheetah cub. The odds of her survival were almost zero. Every rational assessment said we should prepare for loss, not hope for miracles. But we didn't listen to rational assessments. We listened to something deeper, the belief that every life has value, that every creature deserves a chance. She paused, looking at the faces before her, young and old, from every background, all brought together by this shared story. Nala survived, but more than that, she thrived. And in thriving, she's given us all something precious. The reminder that compassion matters, that individual actions create ripples, that the future of conservation isn't just about protecting animals, it's about protecting the connection between humans and the natural world. The crowd erupted in applause. Amara looked back at Nala, who had stood and was watching her intently, those amber eyes bright and aware. And in that moment, Amara understood the full weight of the miracle they had witnessed. It wasn't just that Nala had lived, it was that through her survival, she had awakened something in hundreds, soon to be thousands, of people. She had proven that one life could matter immensely, that hope was not naive but necessary, that love could be a force powerful enough to change the world. As darkness fell and the celebration continued, Amara slipped away to Nala's enclosure. The cheetah came to the fence immediately, chirping softly, pressing her face against the barrier. "Look what you've done," Amara whispered, reaching through to stroke Nala's cheek. "Look at all the lives you've touched. You're not just a survivor, girl. You're a teacher, a healer, a miracle." Nala purred, that deep, rumbling sound of absolute contentment. And under the vast, star-filled sky of the African night, woman and cheetah stood together, two beings who had saved each other, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of near tragedy, who had proven that sometimes, against all odds, love really does win. 3 years had passed since that first desperate call from Thabo, and the world looked different now. Not the physical world. The reserve remained as it had always been, wild and untamed, golden grasslands stretching to distant horizons. But the invisible world, the one built from connections and commitments and transformed hearts, that had changed profoundly. The Nala project had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as one cheetah and one woman's refusal to give up had grown into a network of conservation education programs spanning 6 provinces. Other rehabilitation centers had adopted the ambassador model, creating their own programs centered around non-releasable animals who became teachers, bridges between human and wild. Schools across the region now included conservation education in their curriculum, often using Nala's story as the centerpiece. The little girl who had left the drawing 3 years ago was now a teenager, volunteering at the center every weekend, already planning to study wildlife biology in university. The former poacher had become one of their most dedicated rangers, using his intimate knowledge of illegal trafficking to help protect vulnerable species. He often stood before visiting groups, sharing his story of transformation, of how one encounter with Nala had shattered his old way of seeing and rebuilt it into something better. And Nala herself had grown into a magnificent adult cheetah, powerful, graceful, her presence commanding despite the limp that remained her constant companion. At 4 years old, she was in her prime, her coat lustrous, her eyes bright with intelligence and what Amara had come to recognize as contentment. The bond between woman and cheetah had deepened into something that transcended words. They had a language of their own, subtle sounds, body positions, shared glances that communicated volumes. When Amara entered the enclosure for their daily interactions, Nala would greet her with enthusiastic chirps, rubbing against her, purring with that distinctive cheetah rumble that sounded like a small engine. On this particular morning, as dawn light painted the reserve in shades of rose and gold, Amara stood at the fence of Nala's habitat, coffee in hand, watching the cheetah perform her morning routine. Nala stretched luxuriously, then began grooming, her rough tongue working methodically through her spotted fur. Luca joined her, now the program's education director, his transformation from uncertain intern to confident leader, complete. "Big day," he said, handing Amara a folder. "The delegation from Kenya arrives at noon. They want to implement the model in 3 of their national parks." Amara flipped through the documents, impressed. 3 parks. That's hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. All because of her. Luca nodded toward Nala. One cheetah, one story, and look at the ripples. It was true. The impact had spread in ways Amara could never have predicted. Research institutions were studying the psychological effects of wildlife education programs, finding measurable increases in pro-environmental behavior among participants. Donations to conservation organizations across Africa had increased. Poaching incidents in communities engaged with the program had decreased. Young people from townships and rural areas were pursuing careers in conservation at unprecedented rates, and it all traced back to that moment when Amara had looked at a dying cub and decided that her life mattered. Thabo arrived mid-morning with news that made Amara's heart swell. "You're not going to believe this," he said, grinning. "The government just announced new protected status for 3 critical cheetah habitats. The minister specifically cited the Nala project in his statement, said the public outcry and support came directly from increased awareness generated by our program." Amara sat down, overwhelmed. 3 habitats, that's thousands of acres. That's population-level impact. "That's what happens when you change hearts first," Thabo said. "Policy follows passion. You taught us that." The delegation from Kenya was everything Amara hoped for. Passionate, knowledgeable, committed. As she walked them through the facility, explaining their methodology, sharing lessons learned, she saw in their eyes the same fire that had driven her own journey. These were people who understood that conservation wasn't just about animals. It was about building bridges between species, fostering empathy, creating a world where humans saw themselves as part of nature, not separate from it. The highlight of the visit was, of course, meeting Nala. The cheetah was performing for visitors, a group of school children pressed against the viewing glass, their faces alight with wonder. Nala sat regally on her platform, perfectly positioned, occasionally yawning to reveal her impressive teeth, much to the children's delighted squeals. "She knows exactly what she's doing," one of the Kenyan delegates said, laughing. "She's as much an educator as any of your staff." "More effective, probably," Amara replied. "We can talk about conservation all day, but 5 minutes watching Nala and people are transformed. She makes it real. She makes it matter." As the delegation departed with promises to stay connected, to share resources, to build on what had been started here, Amara felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: genuine optimism about the future. That evening, after the visitors had left and the center had grown quiet, Amara did something she rarely permitted herself. She entered Nala's enclosure, not for training or enrichment or medical checks, but simply to be together. Nala approached immediately, chirping her greeting, rubbing her head against Amara's hip. They walked together through the habitat, Nala leading the way with her distinctive gait, Amara following, her hand occasionally resting on the cheetah's back. They settled under the acacia tree, Nala lying down in the soft grass, Amara sitting beside her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those impossible African colors, orange and purple and pink, so vivid they seemed unreal. "Do you know what you've done?" Amara asked softly, stroking Nala's head. "Do you understand what your life has meant?" Nala's eyes were half closed, her expression peaceful. She purred, that deep, rumbling sound that Amara had come to associate with complete contentment. "I used to think saving you was about keeping you alive," Amara continued. "I thought if I could just heal your body, fix your leg, give you a safe place, that would be enough. But you taught me something I should have known all along. Saving isn't just about survival. It's about purpose, about connection, about showing the world that every life has the power to create change. She thought about the journey they'd shared, the desperate first night, the setbacks and triumphs, the moment of crisis when sepsis had nearly claimed Nala's life, the slow building of trust and love. Every moment had led to this. A program that was changing conservation education across an entire continent, thousands of people inspired to act, policies shifting, habitats protected. All because one woman had looked at a dying cub and refused to accept that her story was over. "You were my miracle," Amara whispered. "But the real miracle wasn't just that you lived, it was what your life created. Hope, connection, proof that compassion isn't weakness. It's the most powerful force we have." As darkness settled and the first stars emerged, Amara leaned back against the tree, Nala's head resting on her lap. She thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by this remarkable cheetah, the children who would grow up to be conservationists, the communities that now saw wildlife as allies, not threats, the policies that would protect Nala's wild cousins for generations to come. One life, one choice, infinite ripples. The moon rose over the reserve, full and bright, casting everything in silver light. Somewhere in the distance, a lion roared. Closer, a nightjar called its haunting song. The sounds of Africa, ancient and eternal, the soundtrack to countless stories of survival and struggle and triumph. Nala shifted, pressing closer to Amara, her purring steady and strong. And in that moment, under the vast African sky, surrounded by the sounds of the wild she had dedicated her life to protecting, Amara understood the deepest truth of their journey together. Miracles aren't magic. They're not supernatural interventions or impossible coincidences. Miracles are what happen when love meets determination, when compassion refuses to surrender, when someone looks at a life deemed not worth saving and says, "I choose differently." Miracles are built from choices, small, daily, unglamorous choices to show up, to care, to fight, even when the odds are impossible. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, those choices don't just save one life. They transform thousands. They shift consciousness. They prove that individual action matters, that hope is rational, that the connection between species can heal what separation has broken. "Thank you," Amara whispered to the cheetah sleeping peacefully beside her, "for teaching me, for reminding me, for being exactly who you are." Nadi, as she sat there in the darkness, holding this miracle she had helped create, Amara made a promise, not just to Nala, but to every animal she would treat, every person she would teach, every child who would stand at that viewing glass and have their world expanded by compassion. She would never stop fighting, never stop believing, never stop trusting that love, in the end, was the force that mattered most, because she had seen it proven. She had witnessed the miracle. And now, 3 years and thousands of transformed hearts later, that miracle was still unfolding, still growing, still changing the world one connection at a time. The rescuers had found a dying cheetah cub, and then, through courage and compassion and the stubborn refusal to give up, they had witnessed something far greater than survival. They had witnessed the power of a single life to light up the darkness, to prove that hope is never foolish. To show that sometimes the smallest, most fragile creatures carry within them the seeds of transformation. They had witnessed what happens when love refuses to surrender. They had witnessed a miracle, and they had learned that miracles, real miracles, are something we create together. One choice, one act of compassion, one refusal to give up at a time. Under the African stars, woman and cheetah rested together, their story a testament to the enduring power of connection, the triumph of hope, and the miraculous things that happen when one person decides that a single life is worth everything. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever witnessed or lived something like this.